I assume that by now you're all aware of the cosmic force that binds together all of us. That's right, you know who I'm talking about. Before talking about Bacon Man, let's go all the way back to early 20th century Hungary, when Hungarian author Frigyes Karinthy came up with the concept of 6 degrees of separation in a short story titled Chains, expounding that any person on this earth can be tied to another basically within 5 handshakes. The main point of his story was a simple ponderance on the concept that something interesting was happening in the modern world to make this possible, implying that the way international communication was expanding in the early 20th century was indeed making the world seem smaller. Anyways, 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon is just a way for this idea of 6 degrees of separation to become traceable and pragmatic. But why Kevin Bacon, ask you, of all people? Well, in the 90s, when doing a promotional interview for The River Wild, Bacon said that he had, quote, worked with everybody in Hollywood or someone who's worked with them. So eventually some college students put that idea to the test and created this parlor game. But what does this really have to do with me making this video right now? Many of you are aware of how much of a movie nerd I am, though I prefer the term cinephile. I was just kind of thinking, instead of committing to this endless watch list that I have of all of these films I want to see that I've accumulated over the years, which tends to grow longer and longer instead of shorter, why not just commit to one single rabbit hole?
Here we go.
100 degrees of Kevin Bacon down the Kevin Bacon rabbit hole.
So here's my plan for the next month. I'm going to start with a Kevin Bacon film I have never seen, and then the next day I'll pick an actor or actress from that film and just pick something else that they've done, weaving my way through the degrees of Kevin Bacon, as you will. I'm going to be picking actors and actresses that I really want to see more from or that pique my interest. I am going to see how far this process takes me through the history of cinema, as well as how far across the world it can take me. So it's going to be kind of a journey across the globe and a journey through time. I'm going to be briefly reviewing each film. I'm also going to be kind of maybe talking about some of the interesting things I learn along the way about these films or these actors or directors. And don't worry, I'm allergic to spoilers, so I'm going to be trying my best to make these reviews spoiler-free. Also, in the video description below, I will be detailing where I found and watched all of these films, so if you feel so inclined, you can check them out yourself. There may be some classics in here that many of you have seen, and then there may be some films that are kind of more obscure, but hey, that's part of the adventure. I'm all about discovering new shit, so I'm excited about this. Now it's time to strap in and join me for my first 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. I'm starting with Barry Levinson's directorial debut, Diner. I selected this one because it was a film that launched careers for, honestly, probably a dozen folks. It's quite an experience to see the young faces of Steve Guttenberg, Daniel Stern, Mickey Rourke, Paul Reiser, Ellen Barkin, etc. In 1959, a group of 20-something old friends are reuniting for a mutual friend's wedding, and guess where they all hang out? It's not a bar, it's not a bowling alley, it's another kind of place. From the get-go, we got some mad American graffiti envy going on here. It's one of those movies that's pretty light on the plot, but that's fine since it's pretty much a character piece. There's one memorable scene where Mickey Rourke, after being egged on by his friends, sticks his wiener through the bottom of a popcorn box that his date is reaching into, freaking her out. What's more ridiculous is that he manages to convince her that it was an accident. Something I guess only Mickey Rourke could do. Rourke's character is kind of an ass, but as a comfortably straight man, I can say I kind of get why ladies back in the day had a thing for this suave mofo. He's just got that sort of bad boy persona while maintaining very warm, pretty facial features, and he's just smooth. But my god, Kevin Bacon looked douchey. There's something very Bart Simpson-y about his performance.
Here.
You look like you got a bump on your head. A black eye.
The first half of the film is pretty generic, run-of-the-mill, coming-of-age mischief, and people not fitting in, having difficulty adjusting to adulthood kind of stuff. But some important ideas eventually begin to develop. I note a specific personality I relate to in Daniel Stern's character. There's one sequence where he lashes out at his wife over not keeping the proper alphabetization of his record collection.
Record filed under the J's instead of the B's. I don't know who taught you to alphabetize. But to top it off, he's in the rock and roll section instead of the R&B section. How can you do that?
It's an unfair reaction, but I kind of get it. Okay, now I gotta address one major issue I had with this film. There's a scene where two characters walk in to watch an Ingmar Bergman film, and fair warning, if you don't know, I'm a bigger Bergman nerd than anybody I know. Anyways, one character's like, I don't get what's going on. And he's like, oh, it's death. And he's like walking on a beach and it's symbolic and whatever. But from the audio track that we hear, because we never see the screen, I can clearly hear Victor Huestrom's nasally Swedish voice.
Who's that guy?
Meaning that it had to be either Wild Strawberries or To Joy, the only two Bergman films Huestrom was in, not The Seventh Seal. So, bad movie, 0 stars. Just kidding. I'm sure nobody else really cares. All in all, though, this movie, it's a movie. It's fine. It has its nice moments. I don't really relate much to films of this type per se. Coming-of-age films often to me feel a little bit lazy. That being said, it does have some decent writing. It actually won the Oscar for Best Screenplay. It's a fun film that obviously has somewhat of a historical significance for launching so many careers. So, if you're really into teen or young adult nostalgic dramas like American Graffiti, it might be worth your time to check it out.
Well, always got the diner.
Yeah, we always got the diner.
Okay, so where to next? I pick good old suave boy Mickey Rourke. And moving on to another film not long after this one by Francis Ford Coppola, Rumblefish. This is definitely much more of an art film and has a lot more grit as it follows gang life. It's also, again, responsible for launching or at least advancing early careers of several actors like Matt Dillon, Nicolas Cage, Lawrence Fishburne, and Diane Lane. You also have a few fun appearances by Tom Waits and Dennis Hopper. It follows Rusty James, a young hoodlum who lives in the shadow of his older brother, a former gang leader played by Mickey Rourke. Rourke is never actually named throughout the film. He's just Rusty James's brother. Rourke plays this role cool and acts like he's outgrown this life, making many attempts to straighten his younger brother out. But darn old Rusty James is committed to being somebody.
Take a fucking swing at me, man, so I can just... Come here, you little screamer.
Take a swing at you?
Come on!
Gotta say though, it feels like the fact that Rourke's character is never named is made up for by the fact that they have to say Rusty James's name every other fucking second. Honestly, it gets really annoying really quick.
Rusty James. Rusty James. Rusty James. Rusty James. Rusty James.
Rusty James!
Rusty James.
Rusty James!
Rusty James. Rusty James.
Rusty James!
Rusty James.
Rusty James!
What's it to you, huh?
Nothing, Rusty James.
Yeah. Matt Dillon seems like he's trying to pull a bad boy James Dean, young Brando kind of thing with the role, but his performance is just not very good. Mickey Rourke is a pleasure to watch though. And look at that hair. He hit the emo core haircut right about 20 years early. I gotta say, I might be developing a bit of a man crush on 80s Mickey Rourke, folks. Visually, this film is quite beautiful. Coppola was clearly going for a modern film noir aesthetic. The deep shadow atmosphere is pleasing to the eye, but Apocalypse Now or Godfather, this is most definitely not. Much like I feel about Coppola's last few art films, the movie itself feels empty and kind of soulless. It's not all bad though. If you're looking for some visually stylized action, there's a couple decent fight sequences, and the last 5 to 10 minutes wrap up the story in an almost satisfying, if slightly predictable way. But unfortunately, this film is further evidence to me that Coppola's best days were already behind him even in the early 80s. So let's see. Can't resist. Fast forward a decade and some, and we land in the golden age of Nick Cage films. In a 5-year span after winning an Oscar for Leaving Las Vegas, you have a slew of ridiculous action films with this, The Rock, and Face Off. He made some seriously great films after that as well, before his massive decline due to an ancient curse. Seriously, look into this shit, it's crazy and kind of funny. But this was definitely his career highlight era. A former military man is unjustly imprisoned and is waiting for an air transport to finally get him out of prison in time for his young daughter's birthday. But the other convicts on this flight have other plans, and Cage is perhaps the only hope in bringing this whole situation to justice. Okay, off the bat, the Cajun accent is laughably silly.
What do you think I'm gonna do? I'm gonna save the fucking day.
You ain't getting near my daughter. I'm the new captain. Put this thing down.
I'm gonna show you God does exist.
Maybe it's his own spin on the accent though, like he had to put his own stamp on it to make it sound Nick Cagean. I'm so sorry. Much like other Nick Cage films of this era, every element of this film is over the top. The characters, the dialogue, I can just smell the cocaine from the writer's room. It's the first film directed by Simon West, who definitely feels like he is imitating Michael Bay here. Excessive slow motion, an absurd amount of explosions, generic rock guitar melodies soaring over the fight scenes, the whole shebang.
Stay with me.
In fact, this movie feels identical to The Rock, but on an airplane. Kind of like how Die Hard 2 was basically Die Hard, but at an airport.
Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker.
A highlight for me, outside of every moment of absurd action, was the fact that this contains probably my favorite John Malkovich performance. He plays the perfect psychopath and is having a ball the whole time.
Oh, nothing makes me sadder than the agent lost his bladder in the airplane.
I'm gonna see my daddy for the first time ever on July 14th.
Make a move and the bunny gets it.
It has an impressive array of VFX, and in some ways I feel like this era was the pinnacle of practical effects. It's just a few years before everything felt dominated by CGI. It's hokey as all hell, but this is a fun ride all the way through, with a variety of compelling characters, and I wasn't bored for a single second. Props to Con Air for doing the most with what some argue is the lowest form of Hollywood entertainment. It's been a while since I've watched anything with John Cusack, so let's take that path.
Sure. Angelica, Griffin Mills.
Oh, hi.
Good to see you. You too. You're looking great.
On to Robert Altman's The Player. Maybe not the most John Cusack-y of the films I could have picked. This is actually the only moment he's in. But this film literally has an insanely packed cast, so many degrees have their tendrils in this one. It follows a Hollywood producer in the early 90s played by Tim Robbins, and he has many encounters with a variety of actors who play themselves. This starts at the high life of Hollywood, but with Griffin Mill feeling threatened of losing his job after not being able to sell any scripts for an extended period of time. And we occasionally get the impression that he's not very well liked by all.
Griffin.
Malcolm McDowell.
Hi, how are you?
Just see you.
Listen, the next time you want to badmouth me, have the courage to do it to my face.
He begins receiving some creepy letters, which eventually evolve into death threats from a writer he once rejected, whom he doesn't remember. This causes him to launch his own investigation into finding out who is harassing him and why. Eventually, this leads Mill down a much darker path than he expected. This film is kind of a satire, but the comedy is subtle and it plays into a lot of tension, so it feels more like a classic thriller. As the plot thickens under Mill's feet, over time, if you have a keen eye, you'll notice a bunch of suspense film posters, a lot of Hitchcock in the background to sort of crown the film's themes together in an Easter eggy way. But occasionally, it escalates from being a subtle wink to a more obvious nod. This is one of those films I definitely would not mind watching again because there are some aspects of the mystery which don't get fully resolved and seem to warrant repeat viewings. I found this film to be constantly impressive. Director Robert Altman has always been a genius at juggling a dozen plus actors in a single scene, and the opening shot of the film is him just showing off. It's a single shot, uninterrupted for 8 minutes, pivoting back and forth between different producers on the Hollywood lot, walking, talking, and setting the scene for the story. It's just brilliantly done. The way the film ends is a little bit on the nose, and it definitely plays into the satire angle a bit obtusely. But I'll forgive it that, because all in all, it's a great film that exposes and confronts the bullshit of the Hollywood system. And it does so in a fun, thrilling way.
What do you call this thing, anyway?
The Player.
Player. I like that.
Again, we'll be taking a minor role from this film. So far, it's been all white dudes, and I want to mix it up a bit, so I'll pick Dina Merrill.
You can't even question me. I'm a juvenile.
You're a juvenile up to 16 unless you kill somebody, and you did.
He stopped again.
All right.
Jumping now all the way back to 1961, we have John Frankenheimer's The Young Savages. A socio-political crime drama starring Burt Lancaster as Hank Bell, a district attorney in East Harlem whom we are given the impression cares more about uncovering the truth than winning cases. This film opens with an engaging sequence in which 3 teenage gangsters senselessly murder a Puerto Rican boy with a knife. This sequence is tautly filmed and sets quite the stage. When the boys are captured, it's up to Bell as the prosecuting attorney to question the boys and follow the trails of witnesses to uncover what really happened. We learn early on that the victim was a blind boy and that this was all over some sort of gang turf war. But the facts beyond that are quite dubious, and depending on who you ask, all sorts of obfuscations arise. Bell himself, it's revealed, grew up in the same neighborhood, so he already has some familiarity beyond being some generic white knight outsider. But the further Bell goes down this rabbit hole, the more danger he begins to encounter himself. There's one particularly tense scene where a couple of gang members threaten the DA's wife Karen, played by Dina Merrill, to the point where we're actually not sure if she'll make it out alive. The final act of this film is predominantly in the courtroom. As some facts only previously alluded to boil to the surface, it pulls out a couple effective twists that made my eyes widen a bit. Some have commented on how this film has striking similarities to West Side Story, the film of which, incidentally, came out the same year, and some early reviewers even jokingly called this East Side Story, though this is most definitely not a musical, and it's told from the perspective of an outside character doing his damnedest to understand the dynamics at play which caused the crime, so it has a much more serious tone. All of that to say, this is a harrowing tale examining systemic hate and violence, in a time and place where these ideas were rarely given their proper weight. I felt like the writing was very strong, and the film did a bang-up job of trying to explore every subculture of the parties at play and give every angle proper justice.
What about the animals who killed my son?
A lot of people kill your son, Mrs. Escalante.
I think underrated is an understatement. I had never heard of this film before, and I think it deserves a second look, and though not quite up to the caliber of other courtroom dramas of the day like 12 Angry Men or Anatomy of a Murder, it deserves to at least be recognized as worthy of being in that wheelhouse. Oh, and one more great performance I didn't mention here was Shelley Winters, who played the mother of one of the convicted boys. I'm gonna swing forward with her.
I think you're a real nice person. You mind telling me your name?
Gordon Ralph.
My name's Selena. Selena Darcy.
Selena?
Onto A Patch of Blue. Here we have an 18-year-old blind, illiterate young woman named Selena who is living with her vulgar-mouthed prostitute mother, played by Shelley Winters, and her alcoholic grandfather in a small apartment not in the best of conditions. Off the bat, we see how terrible and abusive her mother is. Her grandfather is a little better, but being that he's still a bitter old drunk, it's not by a significant margin. After Selena begins spending some of her days in the park across the street from her apartment, she encounters a caring, intelligent young man played by Sidney Poitier. The two spend a significant amount of time together. Ralph helps Selena experience new things and begins to educate her, since it becomes clear that she's had very little schooling from living in a sheltered, low-income life. Over time, as you might guess, love starts to blossom, but Selena doesn't find out until much later that Ralph is a black man. And let's just say this becomes a bit of a problem for her mother, who's clearly racist. This is a film that was made right in the middle of the civil rights movement, and it wears its themes pretty openly on its sleeve. It seems likely that this film's concept was birthed from the old saying, love is blind. But is blindness a blessing, or a curse, or both? In this case, it saves Selena from prejudice. However, we also discover that her disability made her a target for sexual abuse as well. The relationship between Gordon and Selena is very tender and felt realistically paced out. It's never too schmaltzy, and I was happy to find myself very invested in both characters. My one gripe is that a few of the characters, including Selena's mother, Roseanne, feel a little bit one-dimensional. Then again, this was a time where racial prejudice was something that was clung to far more openly in society, so a broad brush to a modern viewer such as myself may not have felt so outlandish to viewers at the time.
That what? That black man! You know what I always told you about colored trash?
The tides were turning, but the fact alone that this film was required to have the kissing sequence between Gordon and Selena removed when it was played in the South is an indication that our country definitely was not on the general wavelength we are now. Because we've solved racism, right guys? In the technical sense, it's a beautiful film. The story is pretty straightforward, but it's clearly crafted with care and a keen eye. Even though it's in black and white, there's such rich texture to this film's atmosphere that I would even call it colorful. To top it off, the score and theme music by Jerry Goldsmith is very memorable. It actually made me feel like I was listening to a recent Pixar soundtrack. Elizabeth Hartman, who played Selena, and Shelley Winters were both nominated for acting Oscars, and rightfully so. This film was nominated for 6 Oscars total, but sadly, Poitier was snubbed, which is a shame since I think he really carries much of the film. The previous year, he became the first black man ever to win an Oscar for Lilies of the Field. So maybe the Academy felt they already did their good deed? I don't know. Poitier was still in the middle of becoming a trailblazer for the black community in film, and he would still have many more great roles to come, but I might say that A Patch of Blue is perhaps my favorite of his that I've seen so far. Well, thanks for tuning in and listening to my ramblings. I hope you all like and subscribe, and stay tuned for my next 6 degrees in this process.